episode of PreSeed Academy, where the topic is how to prepare your startup for international scaling. Just a little intro before we start. So PreSeed Academy is a collaboration between PreSeed Ventures and myself. So PreSeed Ventures is, I guess, Denmark's largest and most active early stage VC fund, who has been invested for the last, I would say, decades. And previously was part of the public innovation system, but is now a standalone private entity. And my name is Nicolaj Højer Nielsen, and I have worked with PreSeed Ventures the last 3 years to establish this. So I'm an independent business angel, but actually have a lot of other investments together with PreSeed Ventures. And together we decided to make this, you can say, journey, PreSeed Academy, where our overall goal is to help founders be more successful in the new ventures. So today's topic is about how and when to scale internationally. And yes, we are located in a small country called Denmark. So for us, it's very relevant. Of course, you can say, would this talk a bit different if we were located in the US? Well, most likely, right? Because in the US, you have 350 million people in your home market that you can serve, which is more or less from a GDP perspective the same as EU. So would you scale as early in the US? Most likely not. But when you are in a country like Denmark and the size of Denmark, it's something you really have to consider early on. And that's the topic of today. Maybe most of you are not, you can say, ready to scale now, but the idea with this talk is to prepare you for that international scaling, so you know some of the strategic considerations you have to do when you are entering that phase in your startup journey. So the agenda for today will be a brief introduction by me. After this, I'll give a brief 10-minute introduction about the why and where and how to scale your startup. And then we have Anders from PreSeed Ventures, who of course are seeing a lot of cases. Both cases they're not investing in, cases they are investing in, and cases that eventually decide to scale outside Denmark. So they have a lot of experience to share about how not to do it when you talk about international scaling. So Anders will give a 15-minute introduction to the subject from his perspective. And finally, but not least, we have Mathias from GoMore, which is a Danish startup that actually has scaled international. And Mathias will share his insights on what they did good and what they didn't do that good in their international scaling efforts. And finally, the last 15 minutes will be a Q&A session where we will take questions. I will moderate those questions and answer myself, but mainly by Anders and Mathias. And we'll expect to be ending by 10 o'clock. And if we have a lot of very good questions, we will extend the Q&A a few minutes. And therefore, it's important that you participate with any questions you might have. So at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the Q&A button. And there you can put in, first of all, you can put in your own questions, but you can also upvote other people's questions if they are something that you think should be interested. So I'll basically start from the top. So if there is a question you really would like to have answered, please upvote that. With these few words, I will try to give the 10-minute introduction to international scaling, which is, of course, a very big topic that you can write a book about and that you can study at business schools for 5 years. So the warning and the disclaimer here is that my 10-minute introduction will be very brief. I think we should go one step back and look about the good old days. So the good old days, you can say industrial economy 30 years ago, what would you do? Well, for most companies, international scaling would not be something they would do in day one or year one. That would be in year 10, right? And that would be something like, I have this example, I took the history of Dansk Supermarket, now Salling Group, the largest grocery chain in Denmark. And on their own webpage, they say, well, basically Herman Salling started this company in 1960. And in 1990, they start the international expansion, right? And that makes sense in an industrial economy where many markets were sort of semi-closed, and there was not the huge economics of scale that we see in today's mainly IT markets, which is the perspective we're having here, or you can say tech in general. So in the good old days, international scaling was typically something you did later on. Of course, there also existed niche industries who did it from day one, but they were, frankly speaking, relatively rare. And then I took a look at my own investment portfolio, and they could also be the portfolio of PreSeed Ventures. And then I could ask PreSeed, how many of your hundreds of your startups in your portfolio are only focusing on Denmark? And I would guess not a single one. It's really, really hard to find a tech company that can focus only on the Danish market or a market of that size. You can find startups that think, hey, let's go for Europe or maybe Northern Europe where the market is big enough. But simply to focus on a 5 million inhabitant market is very unthinkable. Maybe they in the end decide to do that because that's basically the beachhead that we have won and will secure. But as initial strategy, I doubt that. And why is that? That's because when we talk about what are companies or funds like PreSeed investing in, what am I investing in? We are investing in what we call scalable products or scalable business. Scalable meaning something that you can scale also international. And that means that from an economic perspective, you call it winner takes all markets, because there is what you call a natural monopoly where the biggest players have some benefits. So you can say right now in one of my companies, I'm competing against one of those. So DocuSign is one of the most valuable SaaS companies. Many of you have known them already, signed with them. They are international digital signature platform, right? They IPO'd recently. Great. So if you are a Danish player like the company Penneo I co-founded, what would you have to do? Well, there are many cases, there are niche positions you can take. So you can say, hey, we're digital signing for specific industries, and you can tailor your product to that, which is basically what we're doing in Penneo. And there's often space for that. So if you're not want to compete against Airbnb, you do some niche that Airbnb not serve. If you don't want to go head to head with Tinder, you do some niche, whatever. And there's most often positions for that, but often not for local ones. In other words, I just found a random graph for some of the biggest SaaS companies in the world. I would really be careful if you said, I want to be a Danish version in one of those, right? Again, I think you could say, we want to be a niche version of one of those. But if you say, I want to be a Danish one of those, I would really be careful. Why? Because they have huge economics of scale. And yes, the Danish market is a little bit different, but not that much. So when you're operating those markets, you typically have to consider, yes, we have to scale. And now my initial talk was about IT companies, right? But you can say, which companies are not becoming IT companies, right? We got our home delivery from Nemlig.com. Well, you can say they're a grocery company, but you could also say they're IT company. I would say, who would you be most afraid of if you were Nemlig? Would that be Selling Group or would that be Amazon.com? I know what I'll be afraid of, right? So many companies, even physical products, are becoming more scalable and more IT driven, meaning that you'll be facing international competition. So it's typically not a question of if you want to scale, it's a question of when. And here I have a very simplified view on that, saying you could in theory scale your company when you have an idea. You could go to PreSeed Ventures and say, hey, I want to do a Dropbox alternative, right? Or I want to do an Airbnb alternative, you can do whatever. Without any local proof at all, it's just very hard. You can also dominate the local market and then scale in 5 years when you dominate that. Of course, then the risk is that you're too slow and that the global players have already taken these markets. And that's sort of the trade-off I see. And then you can say, but should I start in Denmark when it's a small country? I said, yes, you should start where you are, because all research shows that your biggest chance of success is that you get success in a small niche market, a small beachhead. And that is by definition more realistic to get in markets where you already are having some kind of resources, right? So if you're a Dane that has been doing business in Denmark for the last 20 years, I would guess that Denmark is a very good place to start, right? It's really hard being a nobody going to Silicon Valley. That might have some benefits in other ways, but it's not really good. So typically you start where you are. So even if you have a global ambition, like I invested in Estaldo, my co-founder of PreSeed new venture, we start in Denmark. Is it Danish ambition? No, it's at least European ambition. Here are two cases of companies that have started to go international relatively early. Pento and Capdisk, both companies I have together with PreSeed. So both of them decided after a local proof of concept to go, in these cases, both to the UK. So you can say that is right for them, but it also means that you have to secure significant amount of funding, which they both did relatively early on. One alternative is another case. I invest in Subways, who is doing AI for customer support. They have decided to do it relatively late. And there are different reasons for that. One reason is that they have a more complex product, which they want to tailor-made with the local AI people here in Denmark, but it's for sure also different funding strategies, where they have decided not to take the big VC round until they're more mature. Despite I can disclose that I guess they have more revenue than Capdisk and Pento together. So the next question is, where are you going to scale to? I think if you read the books, they would talk about the internal resources you're having. What are you good at? Again, I know people in Denmark. I speak Danish. Maybe Denmark is better for me than Germany, where I know nobody and I don't speak Germany. But it's of course also a result of the external landscape, right? So if the competition is really, really harsh and the market is not matured in one market, maybe it's better to go for another market. In real life, what do startups do? They also do opportunistic behavior, right? So I'm a shareholder in Clued, and Clued did an affiliate in Australia. Why Australia? Well, the founder is Australian, and they had a lot of good connections in Australia. So despite being a Danish company, they made an affiliate there. And the final thing, before I'll give the word to Anders, is the how. Because when you've decided that you want to go into a new market, you can do it in many ways. And again, the simplistic view is you can do it where you're saying, I invest very little, meaning I have no control because I work with partners, or the alternative, I build my own sales affiliates and sales teams globally, which of course give me control, but also very high investments. And the one to the left can seem so fantastic, right? Oh my God, I let partners do all the work and they will build the business. I can just say that the startup world is full of startups that die because they relied on partners. So this is not so black and white. I would be really careful in many ways to internationalize only via partners, at least if it's not something you're really, really sure at. Why? Because most partners are really bad at taking really innovative products. Again, this is the 5-minute version of something that you should study for years. But again, this is what I say are the key things. So we're talking about that most startups that are in scalable business in many IT will have to consider at some point in time if they're going to scale outside Denmark. The question is not really if they're going to, but when and how they're going to do it. And with these words, I would give the word to Anders from PreSeed Ventures, who will share some of his experience from working at PreSeed Ventures.
Thank you, Nicolaj. Thank you for the great inspiration. And hello, everyone. Happy to be here virtually, hopefully soon physically. 15 minutes. It'll be, as Nicolaj said, a big topic to cover in a short amount of time, where Nicolaj touched upon a lot of his individual startups, and Matthias later on will go deep into his case. I'll be giving a little bit more broad context from an investor perspective. So brief the agenda. The main part is section 2, but I'll just start out kicking off with a brief intro of PreSeed Ventures and our academy. Then the whole topic of today, and then I'll end up just giving you a 1-minute take on how you should approach an investor. Jumping into us, we are a team of 20 people actually. So this is already an old slide. We have added 4 people during the last month to our team. But one of the assets or one of the activities we have in PreSeed Ventures is PreSeed Academy, which I'll come back to. But we have been in the market for 15, 20 years as investors and invested more than 400 startups, one of them being GoMore. So happy to see that concrete example today. And as I said, PreSeed Academy is one of our more recent activities we started 3 years ago together with Nicolaj. As an investor, we are in the pre-seed seed stage. And talking about scaling today, you can say that if you ask Series A investors how they perceive scaling or perceive themselves, they would say that, well, come to us when you're ready for scaling. And then you'll say, well, how much can you invest? And they'll say, well, we only go into rounds between 5 and 15 million euros. So that's just one give. So if you take Liquido or Capdesk or Pento, like Nicolaj just touched upon, they are examples of companies that have already expanded to new markets, but they are still preparing for the whole shebang of scaling. Again, we have been investing in a lot of companies. I don't want to use too much time on this, but here you can see some of the great slides. Maybe you will be one of them in the future, hopefully. And in PreSeed Academy, we have hosted a lot of events so far. We have had a lot of talks with a lot of our founders. We've had a lot of participants, and just for your awareness, all the slides and the topic of today will be video recorded, so you can see it afterwards and maybe also share it with your team. We try and be as concrete and actual in the topics that we cover. So today is a huge topic about international scaling, but of course a big part of that is also about sales. And sales will come and have been actually a topic on our, also you can go in and find that in our site, on our platform. Very brief about PreSeed Ventures. You can always contact, and I'll, in the end of this section, also talk about how you get in touch with us. But jumping into the topic, and sure we have enough time for that, getting in shape for international scaling. Scaling is so much, and it's something you want to be prepared for, because otherwise it can be incredibly expensive and incredibly you can say an output that you don't want. So here's some of the aspects you need to consider if you want to try scale at least. I tried to cover it up here in scale readiness and then say, well, when you have all these things, then you go do. But before you can go do, you have a lot of things you need to be prepared for. That could be identify the right metrics and hit the required target levels for you to raise that amount of money, which Nicolaj talked about. Within this is also about finding out what kind of business you are and what you need to go for. Then it's also about validating your business model, not just in your home market. So for Føtex in Denmark, well, if I'm a Polish guy or woman, will I eat the same kind of products? If I'm Pento, do we handle our salaries the same way in UK as we do in Denmark? So proving your value proposition and your business model, for that sake, in another market is needed for you to raise scaling capital. Based on those insights, you will actually be able to do a playbook. Some call it a marketing playbook, you could call it expansion playbook, because that you'll use when you structure your, say, sales and go-to-market efforts in your scaling period. And all that will be combined in a huge deck of planning and a huge deck of activities which you need to showcase, and I'll come back to that. So I've tried to divide these 4 things in, and we'll cover them now. The first one, identify the right metrics for your business, and then ensure you have runway to hit the sufficient target levels. Of course, that can be over several funding rounds, but one place to go, and we mentioned in the previous talks as well, is the whole funding napkin done by Point9, the very respected European seed investor, actually investor in Pento, among others. They've taken on to assess a lot of IT companies and how they have been able in raising money across the stages. And what kind of stage they've been at regarding team, product, markets, traction, so forth. So just Google it, you'll find it, and they update those napkins every year, and you will find some good information on your type of business and what you should be able to focus on hitting those inflection points. Then I mentioned a little bit about this. It's also about ensuring that when you want to scale, that you have a product and service hitting a market, a problem and a market that can scale economically viable. And that's the whole difference between testing and validating, not just in an MVP session, but in a market setting. So in a commercial setting, testing that in most cases, you need to showcase that in more markets than just one, maybe except if you're big markets like US, but as Nicolaj showed in the picture, we are a very small market. We we rely on exporting our business. And you as a startup in Denmark, more or less, maybe you can take a case like Lunar, but a lot of cases need to go in new markets before they can truly scale. One aspect you can also to build out your horizon in this aspect is to read the book by Reid Hoffman, the former co-founder of PayPal and LinkedIn. He's done a pretty good job in writing the book Blitzscaling, but that's a whole nother approach where you actually invest a lot of money in scaling before you even hit your metrics, having proved your business model. So there are cases, there are markets where you can actually, and there are beliefs where you can scale before that. But just saying, it's a huge aspect of scaling, and there are a lot of considerations to do. I actually just saw a question on the Q&A, the first question, and just want to take it in here because the question was, if I want to address a certain market, could I do that? What's the insight? Well, if you go to expansion and want to enter into new markets, so if you're a pencil going to UK, if you're Capdesk, maybe the same, or if you want to go to a German market, well, it's actually pretty straightforward. You need to do your research. So here you can see a little bit about inspiration about how you should go, what kind of activities you should go about if you want to explore a new market as your potential next market. Again, we'll share these slides and you have them later. And I'll also come back to where I have these slides from, because it's not my own. Because these slides are actually from PreSeed Ventures, who've done a pretty good job on giving out some materials on how to scale for the US, and I'll share the link in a minute. But some other consideration, if you want to prepare yourself, for instance, for scaling, could be questions like, should I open an office another place? Then you would identify a lot of selection criteria. We had in one of our previous PreSeed Academy talks, we had Vino talking about their decision on moving to the US, and they decided to relocate to San Francisco. But after those learnings, they actually found out, and that was what they said in a talk, at least, or a public talk, that they could just as much have been opening up in New York, and that would have been cheaper and a lot of good reasons. So there's so many considerations when you really scale. Then it's also about, should you move your personnel? If you take Pento, I don't know maybe Nicolaj could comment on that, but I know we have Forecast in our portfolio as well. They moved to the UK actually because they saw that if they really need to do enterprise sale, which they do, then they need to be close to the customers. So again, depending on what kind of customers you're serving, that's also an aspect to consider. Then you need to rethink your people strategy. You can also, again, I will refer to one of our PreSeed Academy talks about people strategy and culture, how you build that, because that's another aspect of scaling, and maybe Matthias can talk about that as well when opening up to new markets. Again, some bullets on some more considerations, because you can always say, what is the defining factor in when you move or when you scale? So many things to consider. And I actually don't want to touch upon this specific slide because it's something you can read, but just saying there's so many questions you need to ask. And that's why scaling is so much also strategic consideration than it is, well, let's just try it out and let's go do. There are also some factors that hold you back to expand. And again, this is not an exhaustive list, but let's say you want to enter a market where, like a fintech company, and it's a regulated market. Well, should you then do it now, or should you then focusing on, if you already have a license to operate in the first market you're at, then expand that and get more customers before you scale? Or should you use a lot of effort in requiring that license to operate in a new market? Also from the competitive aspect, if you hit the whole big US aspect here, it's a huge market, yes, but it's also an extremely competitive market, which requires extremely amount of capital. And then we can continue with the human support, the same. I can refer you to this deck. You can find it on the source here in PreSeed Ventures own page. It's specific for the US market, but there are a ton of material on just preparing and scaling to a new market. So maybe you can use some of those arguments or rationale if you want to address another market, because you're probably not going to the US as the next market. I'll not advise you to do so anyway, unless you're a huge company already. Then the latter part was, well, so if you have identified your metrics that is supporting the kind of business you are doing, and you believe you hit those metrics that based on some good analysis can showcase, well, then we're ready to raise a seed round, Series A round. Then, and you've proven it in more markets, and you've more or less been able to show that the plans you have, they're built on your performance data. Then you're ready to build a huge stack. This is actually a deck showing from Simplify they did early on. This is a deck maybe 4 years old. I'm of course allowed to show it, from Jakob, the CEO there, or the CFO. Just saying that it's a huge amount of work going into scaling. And preparing that plan, I actually got the question a lot of times. So what is actually, how do you then, because it's a budget, it's activities underneath, how do you know how to hit that ambitious level? Well, a good place to start is actually following the triple, double, double concept, which you can find a lot of good comments on, but there's a specific link here you can go in, and that will support you in actually how do you, like good benchmarking, whether you are hitting serious enough targets and revenue levels and so forth, growth levels, when you scale a plan or you prepare a plan for scaling. So that was, I don't know if I think I'm more or less running out of time here, but maybe the summary here is that it's a huge market. This is not something you can cover about, asking a few questions, but there's a lot of material that can prepare you for it. And I think those three, if we go back, if you try and consider, these four aspects, and you use those supporting materials that have been built already by experienced investors or founders out there, then I think you can prepare yourself for scaling. Yes.
Thank you, Anders.
And then just 1 minute, Nicolaj, here. I think I have 1 minute here.
Yes,
just investment process, because that's a classic thing. I know 50% more or less of the participants here in this call is recurring participants, so they might have heard it before. But those other 50%, they would also want to hear. So how does it? What does it take to get into contact with an investor? It could be, for example, PreSeed Ventures or Nicolaj. And just saying there's something we like as investors, and there's something that you should do as somebody seeking for funding. So we like, for example, that to get to know you before you and your plans before you actually fundraise. So we don't necessarily like that you just come knocking on our door and say, hey, can you fundraise us tomorrow? The answer would probably be no. So what you should do is build relationships and show you're ambitious. And we want to follow lines, not dots, meaning we would like to see you execute. So create that relationship and of course showcase that you are executing and progressing well, fine, within a very short period of time. It could be a few months, but still you should be able to focus on building those relationships. And that doesn't stop when you get the first round of money. That continues forever, and probably Matthias will also reckon that. Then we would like to see you execute, of course, as I said, and that is more about ensure that you don't overpromise and underdeliver. Rather, you should underpromise and overdeliver, of course. And then we like to see you move fast, and we are ready to move fast if you are more or less prepared us to do so. So I think that's the more generic talk, but as well. Over to you, Nicolaj.
No, sorry, it was not to interrupt you. I just thought you were done. But thanks a lot, Anders. And now we give the words right on time to Matthias.
All right. Thanks a lot for the invitation, and thanks also for the very nice presentations, both of you, Nicolaj and Anders. It resonated very much with me, and both when it comes to successes, but definitely also to failures. I think a lot of the observations that you were giving. So what I was asked to do by Nicolaj and Anders and Louise organizing this was to basically tell about what GoMore has experienced in internationalization or internationalization wise. Not so much giving my theory about what internationalization is, but just be as concrete as possible in telling about what has worked and what has not worked so well. So I'll try to do that as honest as possible. I will give a brief introduction to GoMore first. It should just take a couple of minutes, and then I'll basically walk through the 6 markets we have experienced from, or at least the 6 markets that are described here in this brief presentation I brought with me today, and then I'll be ready to ask to answer any or discuss any possible topics coming out of that. So with these words, let me try to share my screen first. As I said, there's going to be a brief intro to GoMore first. If you are Danish, all of you listening in, most of you might know GoMore already. We are a car sharing platform. We help people share cars. That is our mission. Took a while to find out that our mission was as simple as this, but this is what it is. We help people share cars, and we have 3 business legs. We started out doing ride sharing, good old school ride sharing. You go from Copenhagen to Aarhus, you sell a ride in your car, like you go one driver, you have 3 seats left, you can sell those to passengers. That's where we started. But very early on, or actually when we started, we knew we had to do more than this. We never expected ride sharing to be a big business in terms of money. We hoped, and that actually also happened, that it would be big in terms of members and traffic, but it's very light when we talk about economics around ride sharing. Whereas if we could move into the sharing of cars more generally with peer-to-peer car rental, meaning that everybody could rent out his or her own car when the car is not being used, then we would be on towards something that it could become a substantial business and as I see it, still basically in any market. It doesn't have to be a big market. You can still build a sizable business even in a market like Denmark. But, and I'll come back to that, there are good reasons for going international when you are building a tech platform that could just as well be used in more markets. You should also consider that. Okay, but we entered peer-to-peer car rental. Also, that's 5-6 years back. We started in Denmark. Now last year, a year and a half ago, we added keyless technology to this platform, meaning that any private individual, at least with the right kind of cars in Denmark, and now also to some extent in Sweden and Spain, can have a technology installed in his car or her car, meaning that the car can just be booked and used by renters without the owner and renter having to meet. That drew a lot of growth, also us introducing that. And then also pretty much since we started rental, just a little later, we added leasing, meaning that if you need a car for more than 1 month, you can get a leasing car from us, a fixed price, fixed monthly price, everything included, insurance, service, maintenance, everything. And you have then the right to also sublet this car on your platform, on our platform, meaning that this is sort of a natural car or sort of a car that's born to be shared if you get a leasing car from us. And just a couple of, you don't need to read all the words on this page. What it says is basically that it's a meaningful mission we have, which I think is also why I still like working for and with GoMore. As I said, our mission is to help people share cars. And the thing is that cars are just stand idle most of the time. Well, more than 23 out of 24 hours a day, cars are not being used on average. Plus, when they are being used, it's only 1.3 people sitting inside the car. So this is very low, actually less than 1% utilization of this resource. So clearly there's a business opportunity in finding a way to better utilize those resources. And the good thing is that that could also have a positive impact on the climate and on congestion in the cities if we found a better way to use resources. So that's what we're working on. And just a couple of numbers here. We have actually it's close to 3 million members now, but between 2.5 and 3 million members in total. Most of them came from ride sharing, but our bigger business areas are in rental and leasing. You see more than 100,000 persons per month are actually driving with ride sharing. Right now, that number is lower due to Corona. But the other numbers in rental and leasing, they actually were growing due to Corona. So it has not been that bad for us altogether. This year, we have 25,000 rental cars, 15,000 rental days per month or more. And we have a fleet of around 6,000 leasing cars out in the streets. It's primarily in Denmark, but also in Spain. And now we're starting more seriously in Sweden, also with leasing. All right, that was just a very brief intro. Now, we are present right now in Denmark, Sweden, and Spain. We have shut down our business, at least for a while, in Norway and France, and we're opening in 2 weeks in Finland. And I'm just going to take these countries one by one, like why are we there, what worked, what didn't work well, why did we leave, or why didn't we leave sooner for that matter. Let's just try to take the countries one at a time. Or maybe one thing I wanted to say also when I was listening into Nicolaj's presentation, the thing about our business, and it takes time sometimes to learn these things, is that it is probably a winner takes it all business, as you were describing, Nicolaj, but it's a local winner takes it all, meaning that if you are in a small market, you need to be a winner. If you're in a big market, you could potentially also be a regional winner. Like we could be the winner in Madrid or in Seville or in Valencia in Spain, for instance, because when you talk about both peer-to-peer, like car rental, and with the keyless technology for that matter, plus leasing, it's actually more city by city game than it's an international game. But I wouldn't want to be in Denmark just owning one city. That then you have to be, I think, the platform in Denmark when the market is this small. So it's a matter of speed when you roll out, as you also talk about, Nicolaj. You need to win some markets, but it's not an international as such rollout. It's really a rollout to one market at a time. And if you don't win in this market, it will just, you know, there's not like just a niche to take out there. You need to go big, but you can do it in just one market. And that's both good and bad in a way. The good thing is that if you own a market, like we now seem to be owning Denmark, at least, it's something that you'll probably not lose, and it can actually be a very good business. So there's something solid to it, but there's also something slow to it, because you don't just roll out in many countries at a time. Well, you can do it in parallel, but you need to win each and every country. It's not a global victory as such you're going for. We are in, so let me start with Denmark. So what's good about Denmark? We have around, I should say, that also 1 million members in Denmark, people who signed up on our platform, which is of course quite a lot of members in a market like Denmark where there's 6 million people living. So so a good position there. I think we can still build a much bigger business in Denmark, but we have sort of won that market and the strength. So I try to separate it in strength and weaknesses, and strength meaning like either what is good for us in this market or what worked well for us in the particular market, whereas weaknesses / mistakes means either what was not so good in the market we were in, or why didn't it work so well. So just talking strength in Denmark, first of all, we were helped as a seed by being a first mover and being homegrown and having time for organic growth. That you work in your own city and your own society, in your own language, it gives you a lot of advantages, especially if there's no strong competition when you start out. It's helpful in many ways. And what was the case for us was that we didn't start with a big budget in Denmark. We started more or less with no budget, but we had the time to grow organically. Very nice and good, very good return on that very small investment. But of course that gives us some, not necessarily downsides, but it doesn't solve things for us necessarily when we go international. Then we can also say there was the advantage for us as a product and service in Denmark, that everything we built product-wise was built, at least in the beginning, with a Denmark first approach. So we thought, okay, Danes, they need this feature for renting out their car, or they need this feature for sharing a car. It's just, you know, it's a natural starting point. That's Denmark, and it also means that there's some bias in your product, both positively and negatively towards Denmark. Now, this is nice and good, but when you then go to either weaknesses or mistakes, I would say the not so good things, at least when we talk about internationalization, is that we have managed to develop a brand. And actually, I should maybe also, I like to talk about our brand in general. We take brand and values very seriously. We want to be a human company, not just a traditional business. We want people to have a feeling of us helping them. And what we're doing is that we're helping people help people. In a way, we're not a car brand. We're not a tech brand for that matter. We're not a transportation brand. We are a human brand that are helping people share things, and in our case, share cars. So that is something you can, both in your communication and your marketing efforts, your creativity in general, you can play a lot with that. But it's something you can also much better do in your own like home market and your home language, your mother language or father language, or whatever that's called nowadays. So build a brand and organization that is sort of hard to replicate in other markets, because if you depend too much on creativity in other markets, there'll be a weakness at the end of the day. And the brand history is quite unique. We started with ride sharing. We were young, or fairly young. We were students when we started, and we're helping Danes share cars and ride sharing. It's even sort of a hippie history, you can say. You don't get a lot of points for that when you leave Denmark and then compete elsewhere. And as I said, the product, also in a negative sense, is somewhat DK biased. At least it's built for Denmark first. Okay, that's Denmark. I moved to Spain. So what happened? So 5 years ago, we acquired a ride-sharing platform in Spain that was already having traffic and also having an existing or a brand name that was getting recognized. We kept that name in Spain, and so far we use the Spanish name. It's Amovens. It's Latin, meaning I move. Everything else is exactly the same across our platforms, like look and feel, text, services, everything's the same, but we kept the name. So it was really good that we could acquire. It was good because we bought it at a good price. Acquire an existing brand and traffic just helped a lot, kickstarted our growth in Spain, and also gave the Spaniards some sense of us being a homegrown company in Spain. You have some home field advantages when you have started out somewhere, have an organic history in a market. But we also did make some mistakes, I see now, and we're actually, as we speak, trying to correct those mistakes. We tried to, and I'll move to weaknesses and mistakes. We tried to build a full local organization instead of centralizing all possible tasks, which we have learned over time. Maybe it was okay in the beginning. As you say, I'm not sure we really made mistakes, but we're definitely in a situation where we need to correct some things now. It makes it, at the end of the day, quite hard and inefficient to replicate organizational skills in all local markets. And we've also ended up in a situation, I think, where we depended too much on local and unpredictable creativity. I think because we came from a history in Denmark of actually having quite a lot of creativity in our communication, our brand, our PR, everything, initiatives, we said, okay, let's also be creative in Spain. But it's just really, really hard to drive this kind of creativity in a market where it's not sort of your headquarter. And we've also learned, especially with our Swedish case that I come to in a second, that we need to run it more out of Denmark if we want to have a high sort of quality and scalability in things we do, market by market. So moving on to Sweden. In Sweden, I should say, we are right now only doing peer-to-peer car rental, very focused approach. And actually next week, we'll then launch for the first time, or the first serious time, leasing also in the market. There's no ride sharing in Sweden. We learned, also painfully sort of learned that Swedes, they don't want to do ride sharing. At least so far, they don't want to do it. And we were just confusing them by also having ride sharing on the platform for a couple of years, until we then said, let's just go full in on with full focus on rental, only communicate one product, and then invest all the money sort of we have in this one product. And that has worked really well so far. We had a real breakthrough during the last year in Sweden. It can still go much bigger, but we are becoming a real thing in Sweden now. And strengths being, we're a first mover or a first fast mover. We've been there actually for a couple of years without investing a lot and having tried different products in the market, and there's been others also in there without investing a lot doing peer-to-peer rental as we're doing, but no one really made a bet on this market. So practically speaking, we are, and that's also we are a first mover. We have one focus, one product, it's peer-to-peer rental, and our brand and product is now fully developed and ready to roll out. We didn't have that in the past. We've been testing various rollout models in the past, but the truth is that it's only now, I think, we are at a level where we know what is the product we want to roll out internationally, because it was not ride sharing. It actually turned out to be peer-to-peer rental, and our brand, visual identity, and brand and communication platform is now developed to a level where we can actually roll it out in new markets, but control it centrally. So we say roll out through controllable paid channels managed centrally. We don't depend on a lot of creativity in Sweden. We roll out through mainstream channels, but with our own creative brand identity developed in Denmark. And we then have a very lean team working closely then together with central marketing and business intelligence. So in the past, weaknesses is we tried to grow ride sharing. That never worked. We hoped for organic growth, also that didn't really work, and we waited for too long to give full focus on one product and one country here. We were hoping, I think, for too long that ride sharing would work in Sweden, until we said, okay, fuck it, it's not really going to work, and also it's not really our business future. Let's skip it, let's remove it from the product, and then just focus on one thing. Now we're opening in Finland in 2 weeks, and we'll actually be using the Swedish model. Honestly, even though we've existed for some years, we have quite some success in Denmark and in Spain. It's only now that we have a rollout model that I sort of trust, really, investment-wise, because it's one product, and we have the channels sort of identified that we use for rolling out, and it's very lean and not dependent on sort of luck or creativity in ways that we have, I think, a little too much been dependent on in the past, but probably also for good reasons. We were not ready, basically. Now we are much more ready. I'll go a little fast now, Nicolaj, because I know time is running out, but just 1 minute on the last page here. We've been in France and Norway also. France was because we saw that we were competing very well in Spain with French players. So we said, okay, let's also enter France. And we got a French investor also on board. But it never really took off for us. And well, strength, I just wrote there were too few, basically, in terms of weaknesses and mistakes. So I see we entered a large market hoping for organic growth based on our ES, Spanish ride-sharing experience. It didn't really work. In Spain, remember, we acquired a platform that was established locally. It's a different story. We established local office without clear rollout model, also because we started with ride-sharing. Peer-to-peer rental is now different for us. We needed much larger budgets to really succeed in a large market. We learned that also. The market is crowded by local players, making it hard even to be a regional number 1 or 2. So if you can't really win anywhere, better not go there. And I think we waited too long to shut down. You know, sometimes when you have a failure, also if you promised an investor to deliver on a plan, you wait. You know, you don't want to sort of disappoint anyone, and you keep pushing. Maybe even if you start knowing yourself that it's not going to be a good return, you'll just waste more money by keeping waiting. And then just taking Norway, that we also choose to leave so far, is that we were competing in a small market with a popular local peer-to-peer rental player. Then we should rather acquire this player. It's a local player that then compete with them. They sort of own this. They're Norwegian, doing only this peer-to-peer car rental in Norway. We should rather acquire them, if anything, not compete with someone already owning a local market. We actually were growing, but never so much that becoming number 1 was realistic. And also here, I think we waited too long to shut down. Again, there's a little bit of a history to it. We also had ride sharing. We're hoping that would take off. It didn't take off. I think if we had decided sooner that ride sharing is just something we have in Denmark. In other markets, we focus on new markets, we focus on rental and leasing. We could also have made some decisions faster here. Okay, I hope some of this makes sense to some of you. I see time is running, and I better stop here also.
It makes perfect sense, Matthias. And I think also what one comment in the chat was, thanks for a very honest presentation, because that's exactly what we need to hear. So let's go to 10-minute Q&A. And I've just opened the Q&A. I think the first one is actually to me. I'll do that very brief. It's about what Pento and Capdesk learned from the international expansion. Pento is so new, and I don't want to really share my insights on that, because I think that I should have asked permission from the founders then. I think Capdesk, I can tell a little bit about. Capdesk started in Denmark, focusing on crowdfunding, realized that, hey, we should go up market for real venture funded startups. And then they looked out and say, where are the biggest venture funded startups in Europe? And where are the most active VC? That is in UK, London, the big center for finance. They went there. Well, the learnings, I think they did the right thing by going there with founders, and they were so lucky that the founders could move there. What should they have done differently? I think going to a new market, also what Matthias saying, and also Anders touched upon, there's so many things that are different, right? That the segments are different, the consumers are different, etc. And that took time. Could they have done it faster? It's really hard to say. It's really hard to say. I think that they did it more or less correct in UK. And sorry, I'm not the founder, so I can't share that many details without asking the founders first. Let's go to some of the other upvoted ones. Matthias, here's a question for you. Why not Germany? Maybe that's a long story, but why not Germany?
So as I said, for the first time, we are sort of fully developed as a platform for the one product we want to bet on or start with in new markets. And also, I think we have a clear rollout model now. It's just at a level it wasn't before. Germany is not really taken by anyone. There's a lot of competition in Germany, but no one has really won Germany. And the thing is that when it comes to mobility and car sharing in general, any car manufacturer or any car brand is also competing in Germany for consumers. There's just so much happening. So it's a hard market, but it's also the market we would like to take the most, to be honest. What we have decided now is that we learned that we can much more profitably invest in small markets. This is also very much driven by where we come from. We come from Denmark. If we were an American player, we might think, or we probably would think very differently. We have learned that, so we're not able to fund as much as American or French players for that matter. It's just a fact. And we have learned that there's a shorter way to pay back of your investment, and actually the profit margins will also be much higher in small markets than in big markets. There's just more competition and more mess in general in big markets than small markets. So that's why we say for a while, we'll keep going for small markets. But we also now in a dialogue where a new investor is pushing for Germany again. Why don't we take Germany? So what we might want to test before too long could be a regional entry in Germany. Again, we are playing a regional game here. Maybe we could win Hamburg for a start. But again, I think it's not just the absolute investment that would have to be bigger if you want to take the whole Germany. It's actually the relative investment. So if you can win Finland with 2 million euros, you probably need, I don't know, 30 million or 40 million euros to really win Germany. And it's just not the amount of money we could. Maybe we're a kind of company that could raise 5 or 10 million euros now, and we would rather than win some smaller markets first. Also, the good thing though is that we are in it's a car category. We are in here. It's a very big category actually. So if you go deep, and you can win a lot, build a big business even in a small market.
Thanks. So Anders, I think here the next question is for you. So this question is about how much traction sales before scaling outside of Denmark. You touched a little bit about it on this napkin thing, but could you maybe just give an example of a classic B2B SaaS company, whatever? What are the typically time revenue-wise where you said now it makes sense to scale? Could you come up with maybe some examples or some guidance?
Sure. Again, I think, of course, depending on your product, if you're a SaaS company, so you enter B2B customers, so if that's the assumption, fine. But if you are an app, because I can see there's another question about that, that could be a total different ballgame. Also, is it revenue you're hitting for scale, or is it growth in users you're hitting for scale? But let's take the software as a service and B2B. If you take Forecast, for example, they started out actually with a solution. They built a big product, used 2-3 years on that, building that product. It was a software suite, and they initially thought they would be hitting the top tier segment B2B wise, so enterprise. Then they found out that was too complex because they didn't have the sales engine. So they actually went down product wise and took some modules out and made it more simple. And then they hit the lower segment, so smaller and medium-sized companies. And that traction they got a lot of in Denmark. And then they found out, well, then based on that traction, they saw immediate interest from the enterprise sale, meaning, okay, now it's maybe more out of Denmark also. So they decided to also move to UK, because when you hit the enterprise segment, it's also about feet on the ground and it's longer sales cycle. So you need to be in more physical meetings and so forth. You can't avoid that. It's not totally self-service. So a number of traction, I'll use the napkin as a guide, but I'll also say it totally depends on as to when you move. Maybe Nicolaj, you can reckon also that Pento maybe, or another company where you see, okay, we're in a very small market. There's 3-4 players want to do a salary solution. Well, where could we otherwise find a huge market with the same or maybe even better pain to the problem, to the product? Then they move to the UK and focus on the product there, enabling that. It's so case by case. And I think coming back to assessing, not just I want to scale, I want to do it right now, then thinking about preparation and what does it require to scale? What is the journey into scaling? There's just smaller steps, and then I will go back to both the slides that I have, but also the index ventures, where you are divided into archetypes. It also gives you actually input on revenue-wise as to when to scale. But be careful about using the word scaling, whether you should go to a new market or not.
Makes sense. The next question is regarding, would you scale to EU before US or the other way around? I can share a little bit of insights here in an anonymous startup, because one of my companies, or one of the companies I invested, is actually now considering a major funding round where the potential investor want to use that to go into US, right? And we're talking about a major Series A round type of investment, but still, they are in doubt whether that is enough for going to US, because I think also Matthias touched upon what does it take for him to win Germany, and then you can say what does it take many startups to win US? It takes a lot. We're typically talking about tens, if not hundreds of millions of euro. So I think one of the fears I have about US, first of all, I would really like to be in a startup that won the global market, and then you have to win US, but it requires a lot of muscle. It's really, really hard to find a niche that doesn't require so much muscle. And then we're back to Matthias' point. When can you raise that kind of money? Typically when you have proven yourself a lot. And it's, I would just say that it's really hard to find examples where you win Denmark and then you raise enough to go directly to US, right? Because, you know, if you are an IT company, and even if you win Denmark, can you raise, let's say, $50 million? It's really hard, right? So I think the typical will be that you have to win at least some countries outside Denmark. That could be UK, right? That could be Pento going from Denmark to UK, and then we're raising a big round, or CapDisc, or for that sake. I think that's all. So say yes, in theory, I would like to go to the biggest market in the US because it is bigger than Europe combined. I've just not been in situations so far where that has been realistic. Maybe Anders, you can share also some of your thoughts.
Yeah, maybe just on top of my mind, now we just talked about software service companies, again, forecasts to UK, now maybe it'll go to US, it makes sense. If you take consumer cases, think about Podimo with Morten Strunge and his team, so very experienced entrepreneurs. They raised substantial amount of money before even having a product, so that was actually before MVP stage, but they still are targeting EU before US, but the product could just as well serve a US customer. If you take Simple Feast, also got a lot of capital before more or less of coming that far. I would also assume that they are more EU based than even US. And if you take the last one, which recently launched the US, Too Good To Go, they've launched all over the Europe with, several hundred of employees before they even try and go to US. And that is with a founder who've tried to scale in the Mondo before. So she knows probably made it there, knows how hard it is to hit the US ground, right? So I think there are many good reasons why we should go with near markets, and also using the history. In Denmark, if you look all of the C25 companies we have, they've grown out of their near markets before they've grown internationally out of EU. So yeah.
And Matthias, why are you not going to US? Exactly for the same reasons as you are listing, and of course we would also. Actually, ride sharing. There's also some cultural observations. Like ride sharing, as we started with, I don't think there is ever really trust enough in the US to have that as a product. Lyft, the only real competitor to Uber, or the largest competitor to Uber, actually started doing traditional ride sharing in US, and then it turned it into a taxi service instead. But even if we had, exactly for the reasons you mentioned, even if we had the right product or market fit there, it's just extremely expensive, as you say, and no, I don't think we could raise the money for it.
Yes, I think we're out of time, but I think if you're okay with that, Anders and Matthias, we'll just take a few questions for 5 minutes more. For those of you who have to go now, you can find the recording, but we'll just continue for 3-4 questions more for the next 5 minutes. The next question is about whether it's okay to scale an MVP, or you should basically do that in your home country. I can share my experience first. I would say we're coming back to, you have an MVP, but you haven't validated that yet. So you need to find a place to do that. And if you are doing that abroad, I just find it's very hard. So assume I have built an MVP for whatever tech it is, hardware, software. the easiest place to validate that is typically where I am. Maybe consumer apps can be a little bit different, because yes, you can do that in Asia even if you're not there. But let's assume you want to sell software as a service in Germany and you're in Denmark. Ask yourself, what does it take? It's just 10 times harder to validate that initial MVP outside of where you are right now. So if you really believe that country X is better than where you are right now, I would say you have to move there in 99% of cases. So if you really believe that you have something that is perfectly fit for Holland and not from Denmark, then I think you should move your founding team to Holland and validate it there. Maybe you could be part of an accelerator, so you have the local community down there to help me. I think that's my thought on that. Anders, maybe you can share your thoughts also.
Sure. Actually, I have a case myself. I can mention the name, but it's from, if I try and classify it, it's if you're in a niche, so you're domain experts in a niche, and you're servicing the enterprise level. Denmark is just so small that if you want with a niche proving your enterprise, there's just too few customers. So you need to, testing wise, validation wise, that's why I want to use the validation instead of scaling, because they're not scaling, but they're proving their product problem, they're proving their product market fit. Then when they scale, if they still need to serve that US market or Asia market that they're addressing, then they will probably need to move, as Nicolaj say, because that's just required, if you, especially if you serve enterprise. If your consumer case, in Denmark, we can take Reflectly, if you know that consumer app, millions of downloads, hundreds of thousands of subscriptions. They are based in Denmark, they are scaling. They launched the MVP after 2 months. They saw that the first 50,000 users, they had those in US, and then just hit US hard. And that's where they have the users. Still sitting in Denmark, but that's a consumer-facing, only self-serving product, which you can handle in that way. So you really need to be careful about taking these inputs in and assess based on your own company and what kind of customers you serve.
Makes sense. So Matthias, maybe a final question for you that's very relevant. How do you find key employees in each country? And I will be listening very carefully, because I'm also out for that key input there. So what do you do?
Yeah, it's also hard. I would say the further you are from your home market or city for that matter, the more you'll rely on recruiters, probably unless you're so lucky that sometimes the network also is just your network, people you know, friends, and access to talent or people. But what we do both in Sweden and Finland, and I think we'll be using the same, or we will be using the same approach for the next markets. It is that we require that the person being the market manager comes live in Copenhagen, maybe for 2 years even. It's just that it takes it's really hard to build a culture across countries unless you have spent a lot of time together. And there, one thing is finding people, but another thing is actually developing a culture together. So I would say the more you can do it from home and ask people to go live with you then in Copenhagen, or work with you in Copenhagen if that's where you are, the better. And the longer time you can do it, the more you'll also win, I think, from it in the future. So it's just, network and recruiters and everything else, but really don't just expect that you hire someone far away from where you live and then this person will understand what you want. It's a little coming down to what Nicolaj talked about when growing with partners. There are no real partners out there. You have to work very closely with everybody to make them part of your team eventually.
Thanks again, Matthias. I would say something in 30 seconds. I would say that remember that besides these startup talks, we also have open doors where you can get feedback. So it's not about pitching your business idea, get investment, but you can get feedback from both investment managers like Anders from PreSeed Ventures and myself. 30 minutes where you basically we're doing this virtual right now, but we're basically just sitting and talking and giving feedback, very honest feedback. The next session is November 4th. And then our next startup talk is on November 24th, where we have what I personally find very important issue is about privacy. How do we ensure that when we do startups, because it's really risky not to take that seriously. So with these words, I will first of all say thanks a lot to both Anders and Matthias for sharing your insights. And thanks to all of you for listening. As Louise already mentioned, you'll be getting both the recordings and the slides afterwards by email. Thanks a lot, and see you soon.
See you all. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.